The year was 4500 BCE, in the heart of Kemet, where the sands of the desert seemed to whisper secrets to those who dared to listen. Beneath the ever-watchful gaze of Ra, a city thrived it, the city of pillars, the cradle of knowledge. Among its many wonders was the Temple of Thoth, home to scholars, scribes, and the enigmatic High Priestess, Nefret. She was revered not just for her devotion to the gods, but for her mind that seemed to transcend the boundaries of mortal understanding. Nefret spoke of visions, messages carried on beams of silver light from the heavens. She claimed these visions came from the enigmatic, the moon gods, who traveled on silver chariots that streaked across the night sky. Most dismissed her words as metaphors for divine wisdom, but a few listened closely. Among them were the royal architects, a cadre of brilliant artisans who had shaped the grand edifices of Kemet. Nefret's latest command had stunned them all: to construct an obelisk unlike any other, a monument that could touch the heavens themselves. Its purpose, she explained, was to act as a bridge, a link between the mortal world and the domain of the enigmatic. Though her words seemed outlandish, her conviction was unshakable, and the architects dared not question her. The site of the obelisk's construction was chosen with great care. It was an unremarkable patch of desert, far from the Nile, marked only by a lone black stone that jutted from the sand like a forgotten sentinel. When Nefret stood before it, her eyes gleamed with an intensity that unsettled those who followed her. She declared it sacred, calling it the pillar's root. As the architects began their work, strange occurrences plagued the site. Tools vanished only to reappear in perfect alignment, as if arranged by an unseen hand. Workers claimed to hear whispers in the wind, incomprehensible yet oddly soothing. The black stone seemed to hum faintly at night, and the sands around it glittered as if dusted with stars. Nefret remained unfazed. She spent her nights at the site, meditating beside the stone, her silhouette illuminated by the moonlight. The whispers grew louder, their cadence almost musical, and she began to chant along with them in a language no one recognized. When asked, she would only smile and say, "They are teaching me." The obelisk began to take shape, its smooth surface etched with intricate carvings that Nefret dictated with precision. She insisted on specific symbols, spirals, interlocking triangles, and what appeared to be constellations. To the untrained eye, they were merely beautiful designs, but to the temple scribes they were equations, maps, and codes. As the structure rose, so did the tension among the workers. Rumors spread like wildfire of shadows moving without light, of faint beams of silver light emanating from the black stone, and of figures that resembled men but walked with unnatural grace. One worker claimed to have seen Nefret speaking with one of these figures. When confronted, she did not deny it, saying only, "The enigmatic are pleased with our progress." Word of the obelisk reached Pharaoh Akhemra, who journeyed to see the marvel for himself. Upon his arrival, he was struck silent by its grandeur and the eerie tranquility that surrounded the site. Nefret greeted him with a cryptic statement: "This obelisk will stand not for decades, nor centuries, but for eons. It is the beacon that will call them home." Pharaoh was unsettled but intrigued. He ordered that the construction continue and that Nefret be given whatever resources she required. The project accelerated, and the obelisk neared completion. Its pinnacle, crafted from a single piece of pure electrum, shimmered like a fragment of the sun itself. On the night the obelisk was to be consecrated, the skies above it were unusually clear, revealing a canopy of stars more vibrant than ever before. Nefret gathered the architects, workers, and priests around the black stone. As she began to chant, the obelisk seemed to resonate with her voice, its carvings glowing faintly. A low rumble echoed through the air, and the ground trembled. The stars above seemed to shift, aligning into unfamiliar patterns. From the horizon, a brilliant silver light began to rise, unlike anything the people of Kemet had ever seen. It wasn't the sun, nor the moon, it was something else entirely. Nefret turned to the gathered crowd, her eyes reflecting the celestial glow. "They are here." The silver light ascended higher, revealing itself as a vast, angular object gliding silently across the night sky. Its surface shimmered with an otherworldly brilliance, smooth yet alive, as if the very stars had been woven into its fabric. Gasps of awe and murmurs of fear rippled through the gathered crowd. The High Priestess stood unwavering, her arms outstretched, her voice rising above the growing hum of the obelisk. The humming of the black stone intensified, synchronizing with the vibrations of the obelisk. The hieroglyphs etched into its surface flared with a brilliant light, casting strange shadows across the sand. From the pinnacle of the obelisk, a narrow beam of golden light shot skyward, piercing the heavens and connecting with the underside of the silver vessel. The crowd recoiled, some falling to their knees, overwhelmed by the display of power. Pharaoh Akhemra, who had maintained a stoic composure throughout, now gripped the hilt of his ceremonial blade, unsure whether to protect his people or bow to what he witnessed. He turned to Nefret, his voice trembling but firm. "What have you summoned, priestess? Gods or demons?" Nefret's gaze remained fixed on the vessel above. "Neither, great pharaoh. They are our ancestors and our destiny." As the light from the obelisk pulsed rhythmically, a smaller craft detached from the larger vessel, descending slowly to the desert floor. Its form was sleek, metallic, and unlike any chariot or ship known to man. It landed softly, its base leaving no impression on the sand. The hum ceased abruptly, plunging the scene into an eerie silence. The air seemed charged, heavy with anticipation. A hatch on the craft's side slid open with a sound like the hiss of wind through reeds. From within emerged figures cloaked in shimmering, iridescent robes. They were tall, their features obscured by masks resembling elongated jackal faces, adorned with intricate designs that seemed to shift and ripple under the moonlight. They moved with deliberate grace, their presence exuding both majesty and otherworldly power. The crowd recoiled further, some wailing prayers to Ra and the other gods. Nefret, however, stepped forward without hesitation, her posture one of reverence but not submission. The lead figure raised a hand, palm open, and a sound filled the air, not a voice, but a symphony of tones and harmonics. It was neither harsh nor gentle, but it carried an undeniable authority. Nefret tilted her head, as if listening intently. Then she turned to Pharaoh Akhemra and the crowd, her voice steady but tinged with something new, exaltation, perhaps, or awe. "They say we have reached the threshold of understanding. This obelisk is the key to unlocking what lies beyond." "What lies beyond?" Akhemra demanded, his voice filled with equal parts curiosity and dread. Nefret's smile was enigmatic. "The stars and what we are meant to become." One of the figures extended a hand toward Nefret, and she stepped forward without hesitation. As she approached, the other figures began to chant, their voices creating a resonant harmony that seemed to vibrate through the air, the sand, and even the bones of those present. The black stone pulsed in response, and the light beam from the obelisk intensified, its golden hue now interwoven with strands of deep blue. Without warning, the obelisk's light shifted. Symbols on its surface rearranged themselves, glowing brighter as the beam expanded. Those closest to the obelisk were struck by a sensation unlike anything they'd ever experienced, a rush of clarity, as if their minds had been momentarily expanded to grasp the infinite. Visions of distant stars, vast cosmic structures, and glimpses of incomprehensible machinery flashed before their eyes. The silver vessel above emitted a resonant tone, low and deep, that seemed to harmonize with the obelisk. Then, with a sudden burst of brilliance, a portal began to form at the obelisk's base, a swirling vortex of light and shadow, rippling like liquid glass. The air around it crackled with energy, and the ground trembled once more. The lead figure gestured toward the portal, and then turned to Nefret, who nodded solemnly. "They invite us to step forward," she announced, "to journey beyond the veil of this world and witness the truths hidden from mortal eyes." Pharaoh Akhemra hesitated, torn between his duty to his people and his own insatiable curiosity. The crowd murmured anxiously, their fear and wonder mingling in equal measure. Finally, he stepped forward, his voice carrying a regal authority. "If we are to journey into the unknown, then let it be as one people. Priestess, guide us." Nefret extended her hand toward the portal, her voice firm and resolute. "Then let us walk into the light together." The air around the portal shimmered, and the first tendrils of its energy began to pull at those standing closest. The figures from the craft stood silently, their gaze fixed on the humans as if awaiting their decision. The sands of Wazet whispered once more, carrying the echoes of destiny as the obelisk's beam pulsed in rhythm with the heartbeat of the universe. As the energy from the portal grew stronger, its pull became irresistible, like a tidal wave drawing the shore into the deep. The crowd, frozen with a mix of awe and terror, watched as Nefret stepped forward, her silhouette bathed in the ethereal glow. Her robes flowed unnaturally in the light, as if caught in an invisible current. Pharaoh Akhemra hesitated for a brief moment, his hand gripping the royal staff tightly. He turned to his guards, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Ensure the safety of those who remain behind. If I do not return, ways it must endure. The High Priestess extended her hand toward him, her voice calm and inviting. Great Pharaoh, this is not the end. It is the beginning of what we were always meant to be. Summoning his courage, Akhemra stepped toward her, his sandals sinking slightly into the glowing sand surrounding the obelisk. As he reached her side, the two stood at the precipice of the swirling vortex. Behind them, the crowd seemed to hold its collective breath, torn between staying rooted in the safety of the known and following their leaders into the mysterious unknown. The figures from the silver craft began to move, their forms shimmering as if dissolving into the light itself. They walked into the portal one by one, vanishing without a trace, their movements fluid and purposeful. Nefrit glanced back at the people of Wazit, her gaze filled with an emotion no one could name. Fear not, she said, her voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. This is the destiny our ancestors glimpsed in the stars. You must decide whether to stand still or rise as children of the cosmos. Her words struck something deep within those gathered. A ripple of courage passed through the crowd. A young stonemason, his hands calloused from years of labor, stepped forward hesitantly. Then another, a scribe clutching a simple scroll, and then a healer, her tools jingling softly at her belt. Soon, a small procession began to form, each person driven by curiosity, faith, or the hope of something greater. As Nefrit and Akhemra stepped into the vortex, a wave of warmth and light enveloped them. The sensation was unlike anything they had ever known, not merely physical, but a flood of knowledge, emotions, and understanding. They felt connected to the stars, to the earth, and to something far beyond either. The portal's light flickered for a moment, and the crowd gasped. Those standing on the edge saw a glimpse of what lay on the other side. A landscape of impossible beauty, where the sky shimmered with unfamiliar constellations and towers of crystalline light stretched into infinity. Machines that seemed alive pulsed with an energy that resonated with the rhythm of the obelisk. The figures from the silver craft stood in the distance, waiting patiently. But there was something else, shadowy shapes in the background, watching from the edges of this strange new world. Their forms were indistinct, their intentions unclear, but their presence was undeniable. As more people stepped into the portal, the black stone at the obelisk's base began to crackle with energy. The symbols etched into it rearranged themselves once more, glowing brighter with each new arrival. The obelisk, now fully illuminated, emitted a deep, resonant tone that echoed across the desert. Back in Wazit, those who remained watched as the light from the obelisk reached its zenith, casting the city in an otherworldly glow. A hush fell over the crowd as the portal pulsed one last time, and then it dimmed. The obelisk stood silent, its carvings no longer glowing, its energy spent. The black stone, once humming with power, was now cold and inert. For those who had not stepped through the portal, questions lingered in the air like the faint smell of ozone after a storm. Where had their pharaoh gone? Would they ever return? And what lay beyond the veil of the vortex that had taken them? Far above, the silver vessel hung in the sky like a silent sentinel. Its light faded slowly, and then, with a final shimmer, it vanished into the night, leaving behind only the obelisk as a testament to the night's events. The sands of Kemet whispered once more, carrying a question unanswered. Had humanity just found its destiny, or awoken something far greater than it could comprehend? The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint rustle of the desert wind. Those who remained near the now-dormant obelisk were left to grapple with what they had witnessed. The High Priestess, the Pharaoh, and many of their fellow citizens had vanished into the light, leaving behind a city and a people on the cusp of transformation. Among those left behind was Mary, the stonemason who had almost stepped into the portal but faltered at the last moment. He stood at the edge of the circle of glowing sand, his hands trembling as he clutched his chisel. Beside him, Anen, a scribe, furiously scribbled notes on a papyrus scroll, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Did you see it?" Anen whispered, his voice trembling. "The shapes, the towers, they weren't of this world." "They weren't," Mary replied, his voice low. He stared at the obelisk, now lifeless but still imposing. "But the question is, are they gods or something else?" As they spoke, the obelisk emitted a faint click, as though its ancient mechanisms were not entirely at rest. Those nearby froze, staring at it with a mixture of fear and anticipation. But nothing more happened, and the obelisk returned to its silent vigil. In the days that followed, the disappearance of the pharaoh and those who had stepped into the portal plunged Wazit into chaos. Some claimed the gods had finally come to claim their chosen people. Others believed it was a punishment for meddling with powers beyond their comprehension. The High Council convened in secret, desperate to maintain order and decide how to proceed. The obelisk, once a symbol of hope and ambition, had become a source of unease. At night, the sands around it seemed to shimmer faintly, and the stars above aligned in strange patterns, as if drawn to the monument. People began to report vivid dreams of floating cities, glowing beings, and a strange hum that resonated deep within their bones. Mary, unable to shake the memory of that night, returned to the obelisk daily, sitting in its shadow and sketching the carvings that adorned its surface. He began to notice patterns, mathematical sequences, and symbols that seemed to correspond to the movements of the stars. Driven by an insatiable curiosity, he sought out Anen, the scribe, and together they began to decipher the markings. What they uncovered both thrilled and terrified them. The obelisk symbols weren't just decorative, they were instructions. The obelisk was part of a network, a system of ancient devices scattered across the land, each tied to the stars in ways they could only begin to understand. It wasn't merely a beacon, it was a key. But to what? As they delved deeper, strange occurrences began to plague Wazit. The Nile, lifeblood of the city, started to rise and fall unpredictably. The weather shifted, with unseasonal storms rolling in from the desert. And then there were the lights, strange, flickering orbs that appeared at the edges of the city at night, pulsing faintly before vanishing without a trace. The priests of Ra declared it a sign of divine disapproval, urging the people to return to traditional rites and sacrifices. But Mary and Anen suspected otherwise. The obelisk, they realized, wasn't finished. Whatever had been set into motion that night wasn't complete, and the longer it remained incomplete, the more unstable things would become. One evening, as Mary and Anen worked by the light of a flickering oil lamp, a shadow fell across their workspace. They looked up to see a figure standing in the doorway of the scribe's quarters. It was a woman, cloaked in a garment that shimmered faintly, as though woven from strands of moonlight. Her face was partially obscured by a hood, but her eyes glowed faintly, like embers. "You've begun to see the truth," she said, her voice resonating with an otherworldly timbre. "But you do not yet understand the cost." Mary stepped forward, his pulse quickening. "Who are you? What do you know of the obelisk?" The woman stepped into the room, her movements unnaturally smooth. "I am a watcher," she said, "a guardian of the balance between worlds. The obelisk was never meant to be activated. It is a doorway to knowledge, yes, but also to something far darker." Anen, his hands trembling, held up one of their sketches. "But the symbols, they point to a network, to something larger. What is it connected to?" The woman's glowing eyes fixed on him, and for a moment, the air seemed to grow heavy. "The obelisk is a node in a chain of ancient mechanisms left by the builders, those you call the Ionetjeru. They were not gods, but travelers, explorers. Their work was not meant for your kind, not yet. You are not ready." "Not ready for what?" Mary asked, his voice a whisper. The watcher hesitated, her expression unreadable. "To become the architects of your own salvation or your destruction. The choice is not yours alone. The others who stepped through the portal now stand at the precipice of that decision. If they fail," she trailed off, glancing toward the obelisk, which seemed to hum faintly once more. Mary and Anen exchanged a glance, realization dawning. The Pharaoh, the High Priestess, and the others, they were still connected to this world, their fates intertwined with the obelisk and the city of Wazit. Before they could ask more, the watcher turned toward the door. "If you wish to help them, you must act quickly. The obelisk has not yet fully awakened, but it will. And when it does, you must be ready to face what lies beyond." She stepped into the night, her form dissolving into the shadows as if she had never been there. The obelisk, silent for days, now emitted a faint pulse, like the heartbeat of something vast and ancient, waiting to stir.